Greetings and welcome to Flanigan's Ecologic. I am your host, Ted Flanigan, and today we feature my friend Andy Lipkis. Andy's the founder of TreePeople. He was its president for decades, nearly 5 decades of impact. Andy is a pioneer of urban and community forestry and urban watershed management. He is now at the helm of ARLA, a nonprofit accelerating resilience in Los Angeles. Really pleased to welcome him to the podcast today. Greetings, Andy. Welcome to the podcast. How are you today?
It's great to be with you, and I'm feeling great and energized.
There we go. And where are you? Are you in the LA area? Are you at your home office?
Yeah, I am in Venice, California.
Well, let's go way back, Andy. Let's go way back just for a few minutes, because I want to talk mostly about what you're currently doing. But you began planting trees at age 15. I think, as I've read this, you heard they absorb smog and clean the air, and that was enough to get you going. Talk just for a minute about that first revelation and how you got started.
Well, actually, it was, in fact, when I was 15. But I grew up in LA, which was very, very smog. And before there were smog alerts, before there were any protections, and I grew up in South LA, Southwest LA, and it was hot, and there was a lot of air pollution concentrated there, as there is now. And on typical days, it hurt to breathe by the end of the day. When I got,
Really?
My mom would put a pot of water on to boil, and I would breathe steam just to be able to get some relief. And I didn't have any lung disease. This was just the state of things. And so it was quite a relief at Earth Day to see the beginning of intentions and movements to start to address air quality. And, the Clean Air Act came after that, and the Clean Water Act, but there were no protections at that point. And my parents used to send me out of the city, me and my brothers, up to the mountains 100 miles away, up in the San Bernardino Mountains near Lake Arrowhead and Big Bear, at about 6,000 feet. So we were above, actually driving up the mountain, we could see that we were leaving this gray layer of air behind. And there we could play, and it didn't hurt. And I grew up loving the forest because it was the safe place. But what we could see visually was particulate smog, and there was gases in the air still there. And it turned out that summer camp that I went to, the trees were starting to die there and across the mountains. And actually, U.S. Forest Service had noticed the beginnings of die-off for a while. And they started a serious research project to find out what was damaging the trees. And they actually put big clear tents over them and filtered the air. And they found out that a chemical in the smog, peroxyacetyl nitrate, was burning the chlorophyll in the tree's needles. So the chlorophyll is the magic green stuff that converts solar power into sugar and food. It's what facilitates, what the tree eating. And when they filtered out the air pollution, the trees got healthier. But the trees were dying because the place where they photosynthesize, where it was getting burnt, the stomata, the holes, their little mouths on their leaves, and you could see these burn spots all over the tree's needles. Well, they weren't just burned; they were producing less food. And just like with humans, if we don't eat enough, we become subject to diseases that attack us. And in this case, it was bark beetles. And what they found is, and it's so interesting how parallel human biology and tree biology is, and that we have blood pressure, and we can measure our blood pressure. Well, the tree's blood we know is sap, right? You can measure sap pressure. And just like when we're weakened with disease, our blood pressure can drop tremendously. The tree's blood pressure, known by foresters as oleoresin exudation pressure, but it's sap pressure. The tree is pressurized. And the resin, part of what foresters call, what we call sap, they call it pitch, because it pitches bugs out of the trees. So when something attacks a tree, the sap flows and pitches it out.
Didn't know that. Huh.
The air pollution so weakened the trees in the forest that they could not fight off beetle attacks. And so they were being attacked en masse. And the beetles were eating essentially through their veins and stopping the flow of nutrients coming from the leaves, the food, the sugars made in photosynthesis, and the water coming up. And so trees were dying so fast that they said if nothing was done, that the forest as we know it would be dead in about 20 years. And they said, no one's doing anything. No one's doing anything about it. It's up to you kids if you love this forest. We've discovered that some trees do not react the same way. They are smog tolerant. And those are the ones we need to be planting. And so that summer, when right after the first Earth Day, I was 15, we wanted to do something, and we were given that mission by Forest Service scientists, and we took an area of our camp where some trees had died, and we cleared it, and we made a meadow, and we planted it with smog-resistant trees. And we worked our butts off for 3 weeks. Guys and girls, teenagers, swinging picks, breaking rocks. The subject looked like we were doing probation camp, but it was joy. And of course, we were in our teen prime, so that added thrill to it. But in the 3 weeks' time, we took the bad news and had seen that we'd stripped a layer of tar and dirt off the soil because the soil had been sprayed with oil to keep the dust down for 40 years. We removed that. We dug in truckloads of cow manure from a dairy and planted a meadow and planted these smog-resistant trees. And within 3 weeks, a piece of land that had been dead,
beautiful,
what then was green, and we dedicated this meadow with the whole camp the last day, 300 kids holding hands around this thing. And it was like a Disney moment because birds and squirrels came in to eat the seeds that we planted. But we had felt and witnessed that we had done a healing. And that, in the face of all the bad news from Earth Day, from looking at the world as a teenager, it gave me so much hope and so much strength. And we went from there to the buses to return home, and we're all crying and hugging. And our camp director said, if this felt good, go home and make it real in the city. Don't just think of it as one time. And that's what I did. I was like, okay. I couldn't.
Within 3 years, you founded TreePeople. I mean,
yeah. Well, I started the work immediately. The 3 years was trying and failing, because I was a 15-year-old with no experience in organization, and so trying to get a message right, trying to get someone to care, trying to figure out what to do. And I wanted to get at least all the kids in the mountains to be planting trees. That was the first thing, and failure becomes compost for success.
And here you are, your legacy. I think you were at TreePeople for what, almost 50 years.
It was 50. I was retiring.
It was 50 years. 50 years. And Andy,
it's 55 since I founded it. Yeah.
And isn't it fair to say that you have been responsible for planting millions of trees?
Yeah, if you consider inspiring, guiding, setting up programs that do it, and also inspiring other people to do it. And
Yeah.
as you can hear from this conversation, I'm very transparent about failure and success, which is critical because nothing in life happens without lessons. And the sooner we take action, fail, and learn from it instead of deny it, the sooner we learn and get stronger and stronger. And so along the way, I met Kate, who, while on a speaking tour in Australia, and we got married and continued to work together as partners. And as we were having larger impact, a publisher said, look, this story needs to be told. People need to have access to this information. And you need to write a book. And by the way, here's a contract, and we need an intro. We've got all of your stuff, the manual from the program that we built at TreePeople, the Citizen Forester program, which trained everyday people how to connect with their neighbors, discover what the issues and challenges were on their street, heat, air pollution, various things, and build a plan and raise some money and get trees planted and cared for so they live. And it might be, fruit trees, it might be shade trees, or combinations of those, or wanting to attract birds that can sweeten the sound. But all that went into a manual called The Simple Act of Planting a Tree, a citizen forester's guide to healing your neighborhood, your city, and your world. And they printed 50,000 copies and sent the two of us around the country to share the stories. So it is actually a workbook. It's available online still for free if you went to treepeople.org, or it's in libraries all around the country. It's really a manual for taking a dream and making it real, but it's based around doing it with trees and healing the environment and your neighborhood. But failure is a really important piece of the process. I call it compost for success. The lessons that you learn, when you try something, you get feedback. And if you're not ready, the feedback says, that didn't work. And then you go, well, try this. It's not that you failed. It's, as I say, it's information and compost that keeps you going.
You're painting a clear picture that this rise to developing tree people and millions of trees planted, not a linear, not an easy path. I did want to get your reaction to being on the Johnny Carson show.
Yeah, and that came about really because of an extrapolation of, if you will, the philosophy is we're here to help. We're here to help each other, and we treat people. We got very good at training people how to plant trees, how to gather people who didn't know each other, and often didn't even like each other, right? Political enemies and all that, but brought them together to do good and not have our idealism, our politics get in the way, because we needed each other. And but that was all around planting trees. And that what landed me on The Tonight Show was something that on the surface didn't really have anything to do with trees. It was the ability to bring people together, because Los Angeles got hit with what we now know is one of the first major early onset severe and extreme climate events. And it was the year that oceanographers' thermometers of monitoring ocean surface temperatures broke. All of their equipment broke, they thought, because they were getting readings in the Pacific Ocean that had never been seen before. And they deemed it impossible. It wasn't possible that could be. But it turned out that it was, in fact, a current of hot water coming from the other side of the Pacific, from Australia, Hawaii, heading towards California. And what followed the hot water in the ocean was a river of moisture, now known as atmospheric river, and the current is now known as El Nino. We've now, discovered it. But back then, in 1980, it really wasn't known. So, no, 1978 is when this happened first, and that river of moisture hit LA and created a tremendous amount of mudslides, and so many hundreds of homes were getting inundated and undermined and flooded, and also landslides hitting them, people getting buried and stuff. People called the city for help, and the city had no program for this. And the definition of extreme early onset climate is we're seeing issues that we're not prepared for. We haven't built emergency response or infrastructure to protect people. And that's really still very much the case with as climate change heats up. Events are getting more severe and they're happening more frequently. But for the most part, it's showing up in a way that our communities aren't ready and our infrastructure can't protect us. And that was the case here. And so one canyon not far from TreePeople, Benedict Canyon, a family called us and asked for shovels, if we could deliver a truck of shovels to them. Their son had gone to school with me, and so they knew they could call. And we loaded up a truck with 60 shovels, drove it over there, and went, oh, you need more than shovels, you need people. And so we helped gather the neighborhood together and got sandbags from the fire department. And then those people built sandbag walls and channeled the mud flow between two houses. So instead of inundating them, it went safely into the street. A city council member, Zev Yaroslavsky, just been elected, watched us do this. And 2 weeks later, the big series of storms hit. And he saw it coming. They was briefed from the emergency management department that something big was going to happen. And he called me and said, could you scale what you did over in Benedict Canyon 2 weeks ago? And I said, arrogantly and stupidly, I said, yeah. And he said, what do you need? I said, well, I've studied a little bit of emergency management just because it's of interest to me. And we need to replicate what happens in the emergency command center. We need a hotline from the emergency command center. We need 10 phone lines because we're going to reach out to the public and ask for able-bodied people. And we need the emergency command center, the fire department, police department to be able to reach us easily with this hotline. We had it in like 3 hours. I wrote the press release and people started calling. And within 12 hours, we had an army. And it was very special and very moving. Who showed up was people of all politics, all shapes and sizes, all ages, though we limited it to 18 and older. We screened them on the phone to make sure they were sane. And if they sounded sane, we told them where to come to our headquarters. And people did by the hundreds. And the really special thing was ham radio operators showed up as an organization, and there weren't cell phones yet. There was no way for people to have mobile communications. It's just these ham radio operators with walkie-talkies and powerful radios, and people who had off-road vehicles, 4x4s and all that. And many of them came as organizations who were off-roaders who they formed organizations based on the brand of the Jeep or whatever the club was they had. But the interesting thing is that many of them had bumper stickers that said "Kill a Sierra Clubber" on the back. And the reason was they were locked in what they thought was a battle for over environment, and they're wanting to use the desert without any restrictions to, get off road and have a great time. And they saw environmentalists as limiting their freedom and ruining their lives. So they had a political campaign underway. And so they had identified like TreePeople as an enemy, but they were there to help. And the what happened is we brought everybody together, and
Yeah.
because
Oh,
we were
great.
saving lives, and the lessons from that were extraordinary. But long story short, that storm went on for 3 days. 1,200 volunteers saved 300 homes and some lives.
And Andy, it's an amazing story, and it's obvious to you, but somehow you segued from, and maybe it's just completely interrelated, you segued from trees to stormwater management.
Well, we'll get to stormwater. I mean, this was stormwater management as emergency and flooding.
Yeah.
And the topic of stormwater management is generally referred to as stormwater quality, the pollution we put in it. And I'll come to that. That came later. This was floodwater and extremes. And what was so important for me is the bonding, that removal of politics and the urgency of saving lives had everyone working together and building trust. And everyone went back to their homes and their jobs after 3 days. And, it happened, but it happened again 2 years later. And it was a bigger storm, 1980. And this time, we were ready to come together because we had rehearsed it, if you will. Mm-hmm. And we had each other's numbers, and we just called everyone up, said, can you come back? Can you get your network here? And the city gave us the hotlines. We did all the things that we'd done before. This time it went for 10 days. 3,000 volunteers came together and saved 1,200 homes. And we even built a bridge at the end of it to help an old retired couple whose house was cut off by a gully that opened up from the stormwater. And this time the media watched, and Johnny Carson lived in one of the areas where there was flooding. And that's why I wound up on the show.
Okay.
He was so moved by the collaboration, by enemies coming together, by the level of manifestation of help for the whole community that had happened across the town. And so that's why that Johnny Carson thing was both so important, but what caused it. But also what came out of that was the people who had those bumper stickers from the off-road vehicles. As we were ramping down that emergency event, they said, hey, you didn't fight us. You didn't attack us. And you care. And they had environmentalists framed as the enemy. And we thought, well, yeah, you guys, are destroying the desert. And they were so vulnerable. They said, could we take you to the desert, and could you teach us what we're doing and how we could still be out there and behave differently and not be damaging the forest? I mean, that was really such an important moment. And in fact, we did that. And we wound up then doing larger scale plantings with them in parts of the forest that ordinary volunteers couldn't get to, that needed to be replanted. Okay. So the collaboration that came from that really cemented for me a philosophy that has driven the rest of the 50 years of work, is that we are divided by politics, and we're divided by difference. And we can't afford to be, because the politics is generally keeping us fighting and is not producing the level of solutions that are needed, because there's more juice in politics and continuing the fight instead of involving the people and actually solving the problems. Yes, we have to have policy, but we have to have it based on a shared understanding.
Well, Andy, I love your notion of restoring the healthy functioning of an ecosystem so it can abundantly provide life support services. And that's tree that's protecting forests, trees that's protecting
Water,
watersheds.
air, pollinators.
Yeah,
It's the whole life system and us. I mean,
yeah.
we are not separate from it, and we're
And how are
suffering.
you? How are you doing that today? How is ARLA? How are you taking all those lessons and all of the experience that you have and applying that? Now, ARLA is Accelerating Resilience in Los Angeles, right?
Yeah, the specific name is Accelerate Resilience LA.
Yeah,
And that's our mission. And it springs from the stories I've told you, is
yeah.
seeing that we are actually seeing increasing climate violence, increasing pain, suffering, and death. And especially seeing the conditions that government is not prepared, does not have the resources. And this is not an attack on government. In fact, I was honored to be brought to a gathering from the head of the California Resources Agency about 8 years ago, and he called 200 state leaders together. And this is guys in charge of CAL FIRE, all firefighting and emergency services for the state. And he said, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why you're here is because climate change has risen to the level that we can no longer guarantee the safety of the people of California. And we have to figure this out. And he had me speak along with 3 other people to share the kinds of stories and approaches. So from those floods in 1980 and all that to when I started ARLA, TreePeople got very good at transferring the lessons of emergency to helping neighbors come together to plant trees, because we discovered if people weren't involved in learning, in collaborating together, raising money together, and planting the trees themselves, the trees died. And tree planting got very popular during the 1980s and 1990s, early 2000s. And so there was lots of money for planting trees. But the difference between whether they lived or not is whether or not neighbors got together and made a plan and participated. And, when there was lots of money available for planting, anybody could apply for the funds, nonprofits especially. And there were some really good youth employment programs built around that. But for efficiency, when they left the neighbors out, trees didn't live. So this bonding of connection is really important. Cut back to that meeting that we had saying, well, look, climate is we can't protect the people of California from this severe and extreme weather. And a month later, we had the major fires that so emphasized that. In Santa Rosa, the fire came instantly, and people smelled smoke. They called 911 and they were told, no, we don't have anything. And this was 50-mile-an-hour winds blowing a spark that turned into big flames in one field of grass that then started pushing the flames, the fire, the debris ahead 50 miles an hour. So before the fire department even knew about it, a neighborhood was burning and it was growing rapidly. And people had essentially a minute to 3 minutes to get out of their house, knock on their neighbor's door and help them evacuate and get out if they were going to live. And the lesson that I learned there, that through line, is we need to be working together, no matter how we feel about our neighbors. The state now is in the highest level emergency, like a brush fire. If you haven't had a conversation with your neighbor about, if in the middle of the night I'm ringing your doorbell and you're not answering and I know the fire's coming, and we haven't had a conversation about, do you want me to wake you up? Do you want me to throw a brick through your window? I'm not going to do it if I think you've got a gun on the other side and you're going to shoot me. We need to talk to each other and prepare.
Wow.
We need to collaborate, even if we don't like each other. And that's really the state we're in right now, because there sometimes will not be time. And when we begin to talk, we build strength. We can rescue each other. That's an extreme condition. But I looked at that and went, wow, we need to build this community collaboration, community awareness. And that's what resilience is. And that's what Accelerate Resilience LA is all about. It is to take the skills that we built in slow mode and use the slow time to have these conversations with neighbors and empower them with really good data about water, about flooding, about fire, about water pollution, because every one of those things, sometimes in very slow mo, as water pollution builds up, we're hurting people. Flooding, it can happen quickly. Drought takes a little bit of time, but in every one of these instances, or fire, or even earthquake, which isn't climate, we need neighbors working with neighbors, and they need good data, and they need to be prepared. And so ARLA has been working especially with the most vulnerable communities in Los Angeles to provide tools, data, information, tools to help people see and understand what's happening with heat in their neighborhood, or water, or potential flooding, and begin to build solutions that are really good. It may be rainwater capture at your home, which gives you firefighting water, but also gives you water for your gardens, which also all the way upstream helps prevent the damage that we're doing to ecosystems where we're taking the water, from hundreds of miles away, the Colorado River into LA, the Owens River, the Sacramento River, extracting all this water from other ecosystems so people who live in LA who don't use water very efficiently can have water, whereas we have enough water in our own rainfall to meet at least half our needs. And we could be creating great jobs, tens of thousands of jobs for chronically unemployed urban youth, managing the land in a way that harvests the rain, that uses our water effectively, that still gives us the trees for cooling and gives us food for our health and even for emergencies.
That's great.
Yeah, that is
so ARLA. Sure. Yeah, that's the big picture, and ARLA is providing these tools as I see it. You've got your infrastructure kit, your climate resilience network.
Yeah, so we put it all in the context of talking about living infrastructure instead of dead infrastructure. And so living is the trees, is the soil, is all that, but it's also the humans, and it is also community. And we are infrastructure, and we can't ignore that. Right. And usually we think it's machines and it's somewhere else. And I just wanted to say that the principles that we are holding at ARLA in this work, and we've created a living infrastructure field kit. It's online. You can Google it, Living Infrastructure Field Kit, and it gives examples of this stuff. But the basis of it is honoring place, understanding where you are and how it functions, growing participation, bringing people together, embodying justice, making sure everybody is in and it is fair, fostering resilience, really building people's strength, and regenerating life. Because so much of the way we've operated as consumers has scorched the earth. And we need to rebuild life, and we can. And it's really within our power, and it feeds us joy, it feeds us strength, and it rebuilds community.
Andy, thanks so much for your time today, and more so, thanks for everything you've done in your career. Much appreciated.
I want to just finish with, I want to honor the people who've always taught me instead of, said you're crazy, you can't do that. And also all the people, the neighbors, the people who've opened their hearts and their pockets and said, here's 50 cents, or $1 or $1 million. People, it's all come initially from people saying, we need to be a part of this. We need to help. And I was just lucky to be in a position to be willing to do it. But it really is an example of what we're all capable of.
Thank you, Andy. Great stuff.
Thank you, Ted.
That's it. Thanks for listening to Flanigan's Ecologic. We'll see you next time.